Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Sumner, registered dietitian, focusing on helping men and women end binge eating, end food guilt, and finally say yes to life. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not substitute for medical and personalized advice. In this episode, we'll talk about the goal of normal eating. But what does normal eating look like? What does it look like to be binge-free? When we talk about normal eating, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? Maybe you might be thinking it might look like eating quote-unquote healthily and not having chocolates. Or it might be something else. You might be thinking back to a time to when you didn't struggle with binge eating, or when you didn't lose control around certain foods. You might be thinking about your childhood, where you can have chips, beans, things like dinosaur nuggets without the worry of gaining weight, and you're just simply enjoying the meal. Because that's what I'm thinking of. That's what normal eating looks like for me. You may have struggled with binge eating at a very young age, and you may have not have experienced what normal eating actually does look like. Maybe you've struggled with binge eating for so long that normal eating simply looks like trying to constantly diet and avoid certain foods. You might be asking, Jonathan, I struggle with binge eating and I've gained a lot of weight. Why would I want to eat normally instead of dieting? It's easier for people who are not at a higher body weight to choose to eat normally. And I just want to say, if that is you, all I want to say is that you have every right to feel that way. Coming from me, who is at a normal body weight, who has likely not have struggled with people looking at you or making comments about body weight or even being discriminated for your weight at certain places, let's say such as airplane seats, clothing stores, being treated differently in your workplace, and so much more. I honestly have no right to say, just don't worry about your weight. But I can only imagine what you must have gone through to choose to lose weight. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, I will do my best to lessen the discrimination with my platform and as a role as a dietitian. But let's also say that you're a normal body weight and you're still afraid of weight gain because there may be this fear of people loving you less or commenting on your body. And I'm also here for you. But no matter what people say, no one should ever comment on another person's weight. If anyone ever comments on your weight, it is a reflection of their relationship with their food. It doesn't ever have to do with how you look. And I apologize for anyone who has made you feel less for choosing what you want to do. I'm also not going to say that you should stop choosing to lose weight forever to be binge free. But I will say that in order to end this binge restrict cycle, you will have to temporarily put weight loss aside, with the keyword being temporarily. As much as I want to help you lose weight to help you reach your goals, trying to lose weight whilst struggling with binge eating is a trap to bring you further into binge eating. It's a never-ending cycle of restricting, binging, then you feel guilty, then you restrict with a diet again, then you binge again. So in order to break this binging and restricting cycle, we will need to eat normally, at least for now, which is the topic of this episode. And before I get into the topics of how or what normal eating looks like, and if I'm being honest, once you start eating normally, you may gain a little more weight, but once you escape the binge eating and restricting cycle, you will have a better playing field to choose what to do with your weight once you've gained these normal eating habits. So let's start with normal eating and what normal eating is. Here are the 3 characteristics of what normal eating looks like. So number 1, after eating a meal or a snack, you enjoy the moment, the flavor, the experience, rather than seeing it as a calorie count or a number. Have you ever had a meal made for you by a family member which looks so delicious, but you just can't help but think of all the hidden calories in there? You might be thinking, what in the world is in there? How much oil is in there? How much carbs are in there? You could look back at a time when you weren't struggling with binge eating and remember how you felt about food. That mindset may be helpful to keep revisiting to help find out what normal eating looks like or what it feels like. If you've struggled with binge eating most of your life and you couldn't remember a time, I will share my experience as a guide. So I remember when I was a kid, roughly around 10 years old, just playing my gaming console, my mom would call me in for dinner. I would run as fast as I could, and right in front of me would be an empty plate for me and this massive spaghetti bolognese bowl placed right next to a plate of grated cheese. And my mouth was simply watering, so I just grabbed the tongs and plated the spaghetti onto my plate. Then I grabbed a handful of grated cheese and spread it across my spaghetti. I only had one portion of this because I was snacking on chocolates in between meals whilst I was gaming, so I wasn't ravenously hungry. And during this meal, I was not even thinking about calories or how to make up for this meal, nor thinking about how it could make my belly look a bit bigger afterwards. I was simply just enjoying the flavors and the experience with my family whilst talking about my day. That is what normal eating looks like. I didn't have this massive craving for that dinner meal because, like I said, I previously snacked on chocolates. I wasn't ravenously hungry. I felt full and satisfied afterwards. So I'm not saying that we should completely get rid of viewing foods as calorie counts because it can be so difficult with social media, restaurants, cookbooks, and more, which are filled with calorie counts of foods. So it can be really difficult to block and erase them from your mind. But what I am saying is that in order to reach the goal of normal eating, we have to avoid intentionally taking action to skip meals afterwards or to eat less intentionally. Rather, to eat until we're comfortably full. And in turn, calorie counting will slowly get out of our minds, and we will refocus being in tune with our hunger and our fullness. So essentially, trying to anti-diet, eat to your hunger, and avoid skipping meals, which leads me perfectly to number 2, to what normal eating should look like. We eat until we're comfortably full. It can be so difficult to find out what being full feels like when we might be constantly restricting and binging. You're unable to feel what comfortably full feels like because, in a scale of 0, being nauseously hungry, and 10, being, let's say, Christmas dinner full, you're mostly closer to a 0 or a 10 most of the time. Comfortably full feels like being a 7 or an 8, and aiming to stay there most of the day. Disordered eating may look like eating lunch and being 8 out of 10 full, but you notice that it was a takeaway of chicken nuggets, a burger and chips, and you try to make up for what you ate. So you skip that afternoon snack and dinner. Then, maybe around 8 p.m., you feel that you're a 3 out of 10. So you go for a binge. Normal eating would look like having the same meal, the lunch finishing at 8 out of 10 full, but then, mid-afternoon, you feel like a 6 out of 10. So you don't want to go too low. So you have a packet of crisps that you've been craving for a while. Now you're maybe at 7 out of 10. Then, when dinner comes at 6 p.m., with you maybe feeling a 5 out of 10, you have a light dinner to top you up until you're 8 out of 10 full. So what I'm trying to say here is try not to leave yourself being way too hungry. Try not to go below 5 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. Keep having little snacks, eating little and often. And when mealtime comes, you'll find that you won't have a massive craving because you're staying comfortably full throughout the day. This is what being in tune with your hunger looks like. And it's because you've honored that with normal eating. And staying full is actually very protective for your relationship with food and can also prevent binge episodes. So if you're practicing normal eating, you're not starving yourself, but at the same time, you're not stuffing yourself until you're painfully full or uncomfortably full. And number 3, you're not restricting certain foods. You might be thinking, if I'm not restricting certain foods, then that's going to lead to a full-on binge. That's not normal eating. But counterintuitively, we only binge because we deprive ourselves of foods for a long period of time, and or we binge because we restrict foods. Remember, you only binge on the foods you restrict. Normal eating looks like having a cupboard of chocolates and sweets, or let's say the foods you enjoy, but you're not massively craving them 24/7 because you know that you're keeping yourself satisfied. And whenever you do have them, that you'll stay full and content because you're not massively hungry, because you're following number two, which is staying comfortably full. Tell yourself that the food is there whenever you want it. So why would you crave it? If we have this mindset of scarcity and we restrict ourselves from having, let's say, chocolates, cakes, brownies, sugar, then this places our mentality of putting these foods on a pedestal. These foods are the forbidden foods, only to be saved for special occasions. But countless studies show that over time, if we deprive ourselves of things, as humans, we would naturally want to have them. We would crave only the things we don't have. Let's use this analogy. If I was to hold my breath for a long time, then I couldn't hold it forever, so I'm just going to be gasping for as much air as possible. So, in the other sense, when we deprive ourselves of the hyper-palatable foods, such as cookies and brownies, for example, when we restrict so much, then we'll be craving for this intense dopamine response. So, naturally, our body would want to have this binge. There's this good quote from Evelyn Tribble, author of many intuitive eating books, saying that if you don't love it, don't eat it. If you love it, savor it. The only foods we should avoid are the ones we're allergic to. So, to recap, here's what normal eating looks like. Number 1, after eating a meal or a snack, you don't see it as a calorie count, but rather an experience you enjoy without guilt. Number 2, you eat until you're comfortably full, maybe an 8 out of 10, and you keep it that way. You keep on topping yourself up to 8 out of 10 when it goes a bit lower with snacks, which can be very productive against binge eating, but also very helpful to re-regulate your feelings of hunger and satiety. And finally, number 3, you're not restricting on certain foods. We only binge on what we restrict. So give yourself the permission to have these foods, but at the same time, to eat regular meals. If I can summarize all of these, regular eating is when you're simply not dieting. And I want you to think about that. Regular eating is when you're not dieting. And I understand that if you have gained weight and believe that normal eating will make you gain weight or has made you gain weight, I'm not saying that you should continue this forever, but we're either only binging and restricting or eating regularly. And the better choice would be to eat regularly. Once you're eating regularly and free from the binge restrict cycle, then you can do what you want to do with your weight because you'd be in a much more sustainable and healthy relationship with your food and your body. So thank you for listening to this episode of Binge Dietitian podcast. And I would really appreciate it if you could rate this podcast well, if you've gained something out of this, so other people will learn what normal eating looks like. I also offer a group binge eating freedom course, which can be found in the link of this description of this podcast. So feel free to check it out. And if you have any podcast episode suggestions, or you just simply want to message me about your experiences with binge eating, always feel free to message me and check out the link in the description of this podcast to find my social media platforms and where you can message me. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys. If you found this podcast helpful, you would definitely benefit from my binge eating freedom course in my website, bingedietitian.com. Learn more about the triggers to why you're binge eating and how to stop binge eating for good. No more food guilt, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more shame. Go to the link in this episode for my binge eating freedom course to be one step closer to being binge free, starting today.